In the opening months of 1942, as the North African desert became the arena for one of the most dynamic and unforgiving campaigns of the Second World War, a small but elite British reconnaissance unit, the 11th Hussars, moved silently across the dunes east of Burhakim. While most wartime narratives focus on the large armored clashes between Rommel's Afrika Korps and the British 8th Army, few realize how much of the campaign's outcome hinged on small, isolated patrols operating far ahead of the main lines. These were missions conducted in scorching heat, with no room for error, where a single misjudged route or unseen dust plume could turn an entire detachment into the desert's next unmarked grave. Captain Elias Rmml, a seasoned cavalry officer known for his calm under pressure, led one of these patrols. His unit specialized in deep reconnaissance, often venturing dozens of miles beyond friendly positions to observe enemy supply convoys moving between the coastal road and the interior tracks. It was a hazardous job. Rommel's reliance on fast motorized columns meant that Axis raiding groups could appear without warning, overwhelming thinly armed British patrols before they had time to radio for support. Still, Rmml had built a reputation for bringing his men home, even from missions described in the diaries of fellow officers as damn near suicidal. The morning his patrol vanished began like many others. According to the unit's logbook, dated June 10, 1942, Rmml departed the forward base near Bir El Gubi with 3 Humber armored cars, each lightly armed with a 15mm Besa machine gun. Their task was routine on paper: confirm reports of a German fuel convoy moving south of Burhakim, potentially vulnerable to an ambush by the long-range desert group. The timing aligned with larger Allied operations preparing for the coming battles around Mersa Matruh. But even in these early records, something feels off. The entries are oddly vague. The destination grid coordinates are missing, and one witness later remarked that Rmml seemed burdened with something unsaid, though he offered no explanation for the observation. As the patrol moved deeper into the open desert, temperatures soared past 40 degrees Celsius. Visibility stretched for miles, broken only by heat shimmer. Communication was patchy, often disrupted by the static-laden conditions typical of early war wireless sets. According to the last transmission received at 14:32 hours, Rmml reported observing dust columns to the northwest, and ordered his unit to adjust course. Minutes later, a second operator at the base noted that the signal degraded abruptly before cutting off entirely. No mayday call. No coordinates. Just silence. The struggle to understand what happened next continues to puzzle historians. Multiple troops from the 11th Hussars were dispatched to retrace the patrol's path, yet all they found were overlapping tire tracks blurred by wind. No wreckage, no burnt-out vehicles, no signs of capture. A sergeant who participated in the search wrote in his diary, "It was as though the desert swallowed them whole." But desert warfare was rarely so mysterious. Usually, a missing patrol could be traced to a skirmish or mechanical breakdown. Here, there was nothing. Even Axis records from nearby reconnaissance battalions show no engagement matching the date. Official reports later claimed the patrol was overrun by an advancing German unit, though no specific unit was ever identified. And within the corridors of Middle East Command, an unspoken tension grew. Several officers privately questioned why the patrol was sent toward an area known to be shifting under Axis pressure. Others wondered why the mission briefing omitted standard safety provisions, such as coordination with nearby South African armored formations. The holes in the narrative were too numerous to dismiss. Yet the most haunting insight comes from a single quote attributed to Captain Rmml, preserved in a letter he wrote home days before his final mission. "The desert holds more secrets than any enemy." Whether he meant it metaphorically or literally remains unclear, but taken together with the conflicting accounts of his last hours, it hints at the weight he carried. Perhaps a burden connected to intelligence work rather than simple reconnaissance. Modern historians see in his disappearance a pattern common in the North African theater. Missions conducted under partially classified directives, where the line between reconnaissance and espionage blurred. The desert, vast and silent, offered opportunities for covert observation, courier interception, and counterintelligence maneuvers that remain undocumented even today. As Part 1 ends, the mystery deepens. a veteran officer, experienced and respected, disappears without trace in the most tactical desert of the war, on a mission whose details do not quite align with the official record. And back home, unaware of the storm of questions forming behind military doors, Margaret Rmml soon receives a telegram that will alter the course of her life. 4 months after Captain Elias Rmml's disappearance, the official silence surrounding his fate became a second battlefield for his widow Margaret. What many families experienced during the Second World War, the agonizing limbo between hope and mourning, was intensified in her case by the evasive tone of the telegram she received in August 1942. It stated only that Elias was missing following a routine patrol, a description that contradicted the urgency suggested by later testimonies. For Margaret, the war had reached her doorstep not with an explosion, but with a void. Her first clue that the story contained more than the military was willing to share came unexpectedly in October, when one of Elias's personal trunks was returned to her home in Portsmouth. Inside were the predictable remnants of an officer's service: uniform pieces, a compass, worn photographs of happier days. But at the bottom of the trunk lay an object she did not recognize: a wooden field chest with a false panel, discovered only because the corner of the board had come loose during transport. Within the compartment rested a bundle of letters tied with desert-bleached cord. They were all addressed to her but unsent, written at irregular intervals over the months before Elias vanished. These letters would become the foundation of the mystery that followed. The first pages were tender, reflecting the loneliness of a man isolated by duty. But by the third letter, dated April 27, 1942, the tone shifted. Elias mentioned being assigned to secondary duties outside the typical purview of the 11th Hussars. He wrote cautiously, as though aware that his correspondence might be intercepted. "Our movements now align with matters not reflected in the daily orders. If these words ever find you, know that I weighed every step carefully." Margaret, puzzled by the vague caution, sought help from a neighbor who had once served in the Royal Signals. He noted that some of the phrasing resembled code, phrases used to indicate intelligence activity without stating it overtly. As she read deeper into the letters, another thread emerged. Elias referenced a suspected leak in British command, a suspicion circulating quietly among officers operating near the Libyan frontier. One letter contained the striking line: "The desert winds carry more than sand. They carry whispers of our intentions before we speak them." Whether the leak was real or simply the paranoia born of relentless attrition, the idea troubled Margaret. She had never imagined her husband entangled in intelligence work. Determined to understand, she sought answers through official channels. Her letters to Middle East Command in Cairo were met with courteous but unhelpful replies. Vague acknowledgements, promises of continued inquiries, and repeated reminders that wartime details could not be released. When she finally obtained contact with a liaison officer, he dismissed the letters as personal reflections under stress, implying they lacked operational meaning. The explanation felt too convenient, too eager to close the door. And then came the breakthrough. A name Elias had mentioned in one letter, Sergeant Peter Haldane, led her to a surviving member of the long-range desert group who had returned to England in late 1943. Haldane agreed to meet her in a quiet tea room on the southern coast. The man appeared weary, bearing the unmistakable look of someone who had seen too much. When she showed him the letters, he did not react with surprise, but with resignation. Haldane confirmed that Elias had indeed been operating well outside the standard reconnaissance framework. In fact, he had been assisting in tracking Axis courier routes moving through Wadi el Ferek, one of the desert's least patrolled corridors. These couriers, often small, fast-moving detachments, carried vital intelligence between forward German elements and their rear echelons. Cutting them off was a high priority, but such missions were rarely documented, partly to protect the operatives and partly to shield intelligence failures from scrutiny. According to Haldane, Elias's final days were marked by tension. He had confided to at least one LRDG officer that something was wrong. Information was reaching the Africa Corps faster than Allied command could explain. Haldane recalled Elias confiding cryptically, "Someone knows where we're going before we do." When Margaret asked whether this leak had influenced Elias's last mission, Haldane hesitated before replying. If he was chasing the wrong people, It might explain why no one saw him return. The revelation left Margaret with more questions than answers. Why had none of this been included in the official report? Why was her husband placed in a situation so far removed from his stated role? And why had no one informed her that he had been involved in operations touching the boundary between reconnaissance and espionage? The part that troubled her most was a brief line in Elias's final letter, unsent and unfinished. If the path I walk vanishes behind me, remember that I chose it with clear eyes. It hinted at danger he understood, danger he accepted. But why he accepted it remained a mystery. As Part 2 closes, the letters have transformed Margaret from grieving widow into the reluctant investigator of her husband's final months. And the deeper she ventures into the hidden spaces of his life, the more she senses that someone else may have wanted those letters to stay buried. In the chaotic theater of the North African desert, where front lines shifted by the week and maps were often outdated before the ink dried, one unit held a reputation for navigating the uncertainty better than any other: the Long Range Desert Group. Formed in 1940, the LRDG quickly became the eyes and ears of the British 8th Army, venturing into terrain considered impassable by conventional forces. Their patrols moved with precision, endurance, and a kind of quiet daring that made them both respected and feared. It was with one of these men, Sergeant Peter Haldane, that Margaret Rmml found her first verifiable thread in the labyrinth of her husband's disappearance. Haldane's account provided context to a detail in Elias's letters that had troubled her: the implication that his missions were not fully documented. Sitting across from her in a dimly lit tea room, Haldane began explaining the overlapping worlds of reconnaissance and intelligence in the desert. "The lines blurred," he said, stirring his cup absently. "Orders changed hands in the field. Sometimes they came from Cairo, sometimes from officers who didn't even wear uniforms. If Elias was following someone, or something, important, it might never have made it onto the official rolls." He went on to describe the growing Allied concerns in spring 1942. German supply routes from Tripoli and Benghazi were increasingly protected. The Africa Corps relied on fast courier detachments, small groups in captured British trucks or specially marked Kubelwagens, to carry coded messages across the desert. The couriers rarely engaged in prolonged combat, preferring speed and concealment. But their capture, when it happened, often yielded invaluable intelligence. The British wanted those couriers intercepted before they reached Rmml. Enter Wadi el Ferek, a dry valley cutting through desolate ground south of the main battlefront. The LRDG had long suspected it was a corridor for Axis runners, but no direct proof had emerged. Haldane revealed that Elias and his small detachment had received informal instructions to tail a suspected courier group believed to be operating in that area. "Not an ambush," Haldane insisted. "Just a shadowing job. Follow them long enough to confirm their route. We were meant to pick up from there." This stood in sharp contrast to the official description of Elias's mission as a routine patrol. According to Haldane, nothing about it was routine. The target was small, fast, and operating in terrain where a miscalculation of even half a mile could send a vehicle into soft sand and immobilize it. Patrols rarely ventured alone. Yet Elias's group consisted of just 3 Humber armored cars. Haldane leaned back, remembering. He wasn't anxious, he said. He was focused. But he did say something I never forgot. "Someone is reading our playbook," he told me. "We shift positions, and the enemy shifts before us." Most men chalked it up to coincidence. Elias didn't. The insight shook Margaret. Her husband wasn't prone to dramatics. If he suspected a leak, it was likely based on more than intuition. Haldane agreed. Too many missions in the early summer of 1942 had been compromised. A planned interception at Jebel Kalak had failed when German forces changed routes at the last minute. A supply dump near Msuz, intended for a surprise raid, was evacuated hours before the LRDG arrived. Someone was tipping off the enemy, or the enemy was listening where they shouldn't. But the most significant revelation came when Haldane produced a notebook from his coat pocket. Its pages, worn and faded, contained brief notes on LRDG activity, dates, names, and mission references. Next to the entry for June 10, 1942, the day Elias disappeared, was a symbol Haldane had drawn years earlier, a simple arrow pointing southeast, accompanied by the words, "Last sighting." He explained that an LRDG patrol positioned west of Wadi El Ferek had glimpsed 3 vehicles moving rapidly toward a low ridge at midday. The distance was too great to confirm markings, but the patrol believed the vehicles were British. Margaret studied the note carefully. "Did you report this?" she asked. "Yes," Haldane replied. "But the report went nowhere. It wasn't acknowledged in the daily intelligence summary. I even asked the liaison officer about it months later. He claimed the sighting was unverified, and therefore irrelevant. I disagreed then, and I disagree now." The omission raised new questions. Why would a potentially vital clue, one suggesting the patrol had been in movement shortly before disappearing, be excluded from the records? And why had the military insisted that no communications or sightings occurred after Elias's final radio message? Haldane offered a grim interpretation. Either they didn't want the sighting to complicate their version of events, or whoever was responsible for keeping track of these missions didn't want it remembered. The possibility chilled Margaret. She had expected bureaucratic incompetence or simple wartime confusion, not the suggestion that someone might have intentionally trimmed the record. The conversation ended with Haldane offering one last memory. "Elias wasn't reckless," he said softly. "If they caught him, it wasn't because he made a mistake. It was because someone else knew where he was going." As Part 3 concludes, Margaret's investigation shifts from uncovering hidden letters to interrogating the reliability of official wartime archives. And with the first confirmed sighting of Elias's patrol emerging from an overlooked field note, the mystery expands into the shadows cast by wartime intelligence itself. By late 1943, Margaret Rmml's quest to uncover the truth about her husband's disappearance had carried her far beyond the quiet streets of Portsmouth and into the administrative corridors of Cairo, where remnants of the Middle East Command still lingered. The war in North Africa had ended, but the bureaucratic shadows it left behind were stubborn, and officials were notoriously reluctant to revisit unresolved cases. Margaret, clutching the hidden letters and field notes, encountered polite resistance at every turn. "This matter is closed," a senior officer told her, his voice firm but careful, as if even speaking too freely might resurrect something long buried. Yet, amidst these warnings, small glimmers of truth began to surface. One retired intelligence officer, noticing her determination, approached discreetly during a crowded administrative briefing. He handed her a folded map, its edges yellowed with age. It bore coordinates scribbled in a sharp, precise hand, dated June 10, 1942, the same day Elias vanished. On it, a single location was marked, deep in the Wadi El Ferek corridor, isolated from the main lines of engagement. Margaret recognized the terrain, a jagged ridge flanked by sand dunes and the skeletal remains of abandoned fortifications. It was precisely the type of place where an LRDG or Hussars patrol might be vulnerable to either Axis forces or operational mishap, yet far enough from the front that the incident could be quietly erased from official logs. The retired officer, who requested anonymity, provided a grim piece of context. "That ridge," he said, lowering his voice, "was briefly under Axis control around that time. Rommel's units were advancing faster than expected, and any patrol there would have been exposed to sudden engagement. But no records survive of a fight exactly matching that date. It's as if the patrol disappeared into thin air." His implication was chilling. The patrol may have encountered an enemy contingent too small to merit a formal battle report, or perhaps too sensitive to document. Either scenario left a gaping hole in the historical record. Margaret's heart raced as she cross-referenced the map with Elias's letters. One unsent note mentioned a rendezvous point, a location where the desert shadows fall longest, suggesting that Elias had intended to meet another operative or courier. Was this the same point the map marked? If so, it provided tantalizing evidence that he had been operating on a mission separate from the official patrol directive. The letters, when combined with Haldane's field notes and the newly acquired map, painted a picture of a man navigating both the physical and administrative desert, moving along paths known to only a select few. As she pieced the story together, Margaret considered the logistics of a small desert mission in June 1942. Humber armored cars, capable of roughly 70 miles per hour on hard terrain but limited by fuel capacity and navigation challenges, would have been vulnerable if separated from their support. Desert convoys were rarely predictable, and Axis reconnaissance often included Luftwaffe aerial observation. Any deviation in the patrol's schedule could expose them to sudden attack or interception. And yet, Elias had been meticulous. Every letter hints at strategic thinking, careful observation, and an awareness that a single misstep could prove fatal. The retired officer offered a final, unsettling suggestion. If he was captured, it wasn't a simple battlefield accident. It may have been planned, or at least anticipated. The Axis were well aware that certain British officers were capable of more than routine patrols. They watched, they calculated, and sometimes they waited. Margaret felt the weight of that remark, realizing that the world her husband had navigated was more dangerous than even she had imagined, full of invisible eyes and unheard footsteps. In quiet moments, she returned to the letters, tracing Elias's handwriting for any overlooked clues. One fragment in particular caught her eye. "If I fail to return, remember that maps can lie and shadows can move before us. Trust only what survives in action." His words suggested an awareness of vulnerability not only to the enemy but to forces within his own command structure. The dual threat of exposure and betrayal added layers of tension to what had initially seemed a simple desert disappearance. As Part 4 closes, Margaret stands at the intersection of knowledge and uncertainty. The map, the letters, and the vague recollections of those who knew Elias hint at a convergence of events at Wadi el-Ferek. An encounter, an interception, or perhaps a capture that history has chosen not to record. Yet one question remains: if he was taken, by whom, and why has the truth been withheld? The desert may hold its secrets, but Margaret's pursuit is only just beginning, and every revelation pulls her deeper into the shadows of wartime intrigue. By early 1945, the war in Europe was drawing to a close, and archives that had once been classified began to surface in fragmentary form. Margaret Rmml, still seeking answers, received a startling lead from a British intelligence contact. A declassified POW transfer record mentioning an unidentified British officer moved from an Italian desert holding site in late 1942. The timing was striking, coinciding almost exactly with the window in which Elias Rmml had disappeared. While the description lacked specifics, height, rank, or distinguishing features, it matched his general profile, offering the first tangible evidence that he may have survived at least for some time after vanishing in the Wadi el-Ferek region. The record detailed the officer's transfer from a temporary desert detention facility near Tobruk to a larger, more permanent POW camp in Tripolitania, which was subsequently bombed by Allied forces. The documentation was minimal. Just a name field left blank, a serial number, and a notation about the transfer vehicle. Historians now understand that many minor POW movements during this period were either poorly documented or intentionally obscured, particularly for officers engaged in intelligence-related operations. In the chaos of the desert and the rapid Allied advance across Libya, it was not uncommon for the fates of individuals to be lost in administrative lapses, or, more intriguingly, in deliberate omissions. Margaret, comparing this record with Elias's letters and Haldane's notes, began to construct a hypothesis. Perhaps Elias had been captured by Axis forces while shadowing the suspected courier in Wadi el-Ferek. The absence of subsequent records could indicate that he was moved clandestinely to prevent the Allies from knowing the value of the intelligence he carried. Such secrecy was not unusual. Both the British and German high commands often manipulated records to protect agents and operations deemed strategically sensitive. For Margaret, this possibility added another layer to the already complex puzzle, suggesting that her husband's disappearance was not a simple casualty of desert warfare, but a consequence of covert operations reaching beyond conventional battle reports. Further corroboration emerged from Italian and German archive fragments released after the war. Among them were logistical notes describing the transfer of an English officer of interest, in the same time frame. While these documents lacked names, they referenced a desert route leading from Tobruk toward Tripolitania, mirroring the trajectory implied by the British POW record. The phrase "officer of interest," was a subtle but unmistakable nod to intelligence work. Historians reviewing these files now speculate that the officer may have been held in isolation, interrogated for information on British desert operations, and potentially removed from official registries to protect both sides' operational integrity. For Margaret, each piece of evidence illuminated a fragment of the past but also deepened the uncertainty. Could Elias have perished during the transfer, as Allied bombings threatened the facilities he was being moved through? Or was he deliberately hidden by the Axis or by British intelligence, to safeguard information deemed too sensitive to disclose at the time? These were questions that no archive or letter could definitively answer. Even today, historians debate whether the lack of records was due to bureaucratic oversight, intentional secrecy, or the chaotic nature of the North African theater itself. Margaret also reflected on the human cost behind these fragments. Letters that conveyed love, longing, and duty were reduced to a few bureaucratic entries and coded notes. The psychological toll on those captured in intelligence operations, uncertain if they would survive, isolated from both comrades and family, was immense. Her husband, meticulous and thoughtful, had prepared for this possibility in his correspondence. One unsent letter read, "If I am lost, know that my path was chosen, and that love remains beyond the maps we follow." These words now carried both comfort and heartache, a testament to his awareness of the risks inherent in his work. As historians examined the context, they found a recurring pattern. Officers like Elias, who straddled the line between reconnaissance and intelligence, often left scant traces in formal records. Their stories were reconstructed through fragmentary logs, eyewitness accounts, and personal correspondence. Each fragment offered insight into their courage and skill, but rarely resolved the complete narrative. In this sense, Elias's disappearance was emblematic of a broader wartime phenomenon: the unrecorded or half-recorded lives of men and women whose missions were vital yet invisible to the official record. Part 5 closes on this note of unresolved tension. For Margaret, the discovery of the POW transfer record provided a glimmer of hope, a concrete link suggesting that her husband survived longer than previously imagined. Yet it offered no closure, only the stark realization that the desert and the bureaucracy of war had conspired to conceal the truth. The question of what truly became of Elias, whether he died en route, survived in captivity, or was quietly removed from public knowledge, remained unanswered, leaving the story poised on the edge of revelation as Margaret continued her painstaking search for closure. The final chapter of Margaret Rmml's search began in 1946, after the war had officially ended and the dust of Europe and North Africa had barely settled. Allied forces had begun systematically declassifying wartime archives, and among the vast collections, a curious find appeared: a letter written by Elias Rmml, preserved in captured German intelligence files. It had never been sent, and yet its contents offered a rare and intimate glimpse into the mind of a man who had lived and operated under extraordinary pressure, in the shadow of danger and secrecy. The letter, dated a few days before his disappearance, began with a tender message for Margaret, reaffirming their love and his hope for reunion. But its tone shifted as Elias described the operation he was undertaking: the shadowing of Axis couriers through Wadi el Ferek, the observation of troop movements, and the discovery of an internal leak that threatened British operational security. He wrote with cautious clarity, aware that the wrong eyes could read the letter. "If my path falters, trust that I acted with purpose," he wrote. "I may not return, but our lives remain intertwined in the memory of our choices." The words were both haunting and resolute, revealing the personal stakes behind the military maneuvers that historians had long reconstructed. This letter confirmed several suspicions Margaret had held for years. Elias had been deeply involved in intelligence work, operating outside the formal boundaries of his unit's reconnaissance duties. He was aware of the danger posed not only by the Axis forces, but by the possibility of betrayal or incompetence within Allied command. The meticulousness reflected in his letters, both sent and hidden, suggested a man navigating layers of risk, enemy action, operational secrecy, and the fragility of human trust in wartime. Historians examining the correspondence noted its value in reconstructing the North African Desert Campaign. Small patrols and intelligence units like Elias's often operated with minimal documentation, leaving the official record incomplete. By combining Elias's letters, Haldane's notes, and declassified archives, researchers could trace the sequence of events leading to the Wadi el-Ferek encounter and the subsequent, unexplained disappearance. Yet even with this triangulation, a critical question remained. The precise circumstances of his fate, whether death, capture, or covert extraction, were never conclusively recorded. The desert, it seemed, had claimed its secret yet again. For Margaret, the letter was a bittersweet vindication. It revealed her husband's courage, foresight, and devotion, while simultaneously confirming the perilous reality he faced. In one line he wrote, "Know that my love transcends even the desert storm. It endures beyond the maps we follow, beyond the reports that fail to capture truth." She read the words again and again, drawing both comfort and sorrow, understanding that while she may never know exactly what became of him, the essence of Elias, the man she loved, had been preserved. The discovery also cast light on a broader historical lesson, that the personal stories of individuals often reveal the hidden complexities of warfare far more vividly than official reports or statistics. Elias's experience exemplified the dangerous interplay between reconnaissance, intelligence, and the unpredictability of the desert theater. Men like him operated in the margins, where courage, secrecy, and uncertainty intersected, and where survival often depended as much on discretion and judgment as on skill with weapons or vehicles. As Part 6 draws to a close, the narrative settles on both resolution and enduring mystery. Margaret, holding her husband's final words, confronts the ultimate paradox of war, the certainty of love and intent juxtaposed against the ambiguity of fate. Elias Rmml's life, actions, and sacrifices are etched into history through fragments, letters, maps, notes, and recollections. Yet the complete picture remains elusive. His final message, preserved against the odds, serves as both an emotional testament and a historical beacon, illuminating a man caught between duty, secrecy, and devotion, whose story will forever linger in the shadows of the desert he once traversed. The hidden letters are more than correspondence. They are a window into a world of bravery, uncertainty, and undying love, leaving us to wonder. In the vast expanse of the North African desert, did the man disappear entirely, or does he live on in the choices and memories he left behind?